Have you ever been laughed at by someone who was supposed to protect you? Not a friendly laugh. Not teasing. I mean the kind of laugh that lands like a slap, where the room fills with noise but your ears start ringing anyway. The kind where you suddenly realize you're standing alone, even though you're surrounded by family. Because that was the moment I learned something I wish I had known years earlier. The people who hurt you the deepest often feel the safest doing it. That night didn't just embarrass me. It rewrote how I saw my family forever. My name is Juliette Reynolds, and I want to tell you about the night my brother mocked me in front of our entire family, and how that single moment led to the most satisfying, silent revenge he never saw coming. I grew up in a household where appearances mattered more than feelings. We smiled in public. We joked at the dinner table. We pretended everything was fine, even when it wasn't. My brother thrived in that environment. He was loud, confident, always quick with a comment. If there was a tension in the room, he found a way to pull it toward himself. I was different. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed things. I remembered how words lingered long after people said they were just joking. And growing up, my brother learned something early. He learned he could say almost anything to me, about me, and no one would stop him. He doesn't mean it, relatives would say. That's just his sense of humor. You're too sensitive. So I learned to swallow things. I learned to smile through discomfort. I learned that peace often came from staying quiet. And for a long time, I thought that was maturity. As adults, we drifted into our roles. My brother became the successful one. The one with stories, opinions, and a voice that filled rooms. I became the steady one. The one who didn't talk much about work. The one people assumed was still figuring life out. What they didn't know was that I kept my life private on purpose. I worked hard. I struggled quietly. I failed a few times without announcing it. And when things finally started going right, I didn't rush to tell anyone. Especially not him. Because every time I shared something growing up, it somehow became a joke. So I stopped sharing. The family gathering that changed everything was supposed to be joyful. My parents' anniversary. Big number. Big celebration. Everyone was invited. People I hadn't seen in years. Laughter. Food. Old stories being told again like they were brand new. I walked in calm. Prepared. I told myself I'd stay polite, neutral, invisible if necessary. I'd done it before. For most of the evening, things were fine. I talked with an aunt. Helped in the kitchen. Smiled when expected. And then my brother stood up with a drink in his hand and said he wanted to say something. That's when my stomach dropped. He had that look. The one I recognized instantly. The look that meant he'd already decided how the moment would go. He started talking about family. About ambition. About how everyone takes different paths in life. People nodded. Some smiled. It sounded harmless at first. Then he said my name. He turned toward me, glass raised, grin wide, and said something like, "And then there are people who take their time, who play it safe, who are still searching for what they want to be when they grow up." People laughed. Not everyone. But enough. He kept going. Framed it like encouragement. Like concern. Said he admired my patience. Said he hoped one day I'd find something that really fits. I stood there, feeling every year of my life pressed down on my chest at once. I could feel my face burning, but I refused to let my eyes water. I looked around the room and saw exactly what I'd feared. No one stopped him. No one redirected. No one said my name in defense. Because it was easier to laugh. When he finally finished, he lifted his glass again, satisfied. Applause followed. Light, awkward, but there. I smiled. I even clapped. Because that's what I'd been trained to do. But inside, something snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Permanently. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt clear. Clear that he didn't know me. Clear that he never had. Clear that the version of me he'd just mocked was a character he invented to feel taller. I realized something standing there that night. The only reason my brother felt comfortable mocking me publicly was because he believed I had nothing to contradict him with. And that belief was about to cost him. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I stayed the rest of the night. I smiled. I thanked my parents. I hugged relatives goodbye. And when I got into my car, alone, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight him. I wasn't going to expose him. I wasn't going to humiliate him the way he humiliated me. I was going to let reality do the work. Because the truth about my life, the one he didn't know, was stronger than any comeback I could deliver in that moment. And the best part? I didn't have to rush. Because sometimes, the most priceless revenge doesn't arrive with noise or anger. Sometimes, it arrives with perfect timing. And that timing started just weeks later, at another family gathering, when someone asked me a simple question my brother never expected anyone to ask. A few weeks after that anniversary party, life went on the way it always does after something painful happens in a family. Everyone pretended it hadn't really mattered. No one brought it up. No one asked how I felt. The moment was quietly folded away like an embarrassing photo no one wanted to look at again. And for the first time, I didn't fight that silence. I used it. Something inside me had changed, but it wasn't obvious on the outside. I still answered texts politely. I still showed up when invited. I still listened more than I spoke. But internally, I was no longer shrinking. I was observing. Measuring. Waiting. My brother, on the other hand, seemed lighter than ever. That toast had done exactly what he wanted. It reinforced the story he'd been telling himself for years. That he was ahead. That I was behind. That the family saw it the same way he did. Confidence like that makes people careless. And carelessness creates opportunity. The next family event was a smaller gathering at my aunt's house. Nothing fancy. Just a casual Sunday dinner. I almost didn't go. Old habits whispered that nothing good ever came from these situations. But another voice, steadier and stronger, told me this was exactly where I needed to be. I arrived with a dessert, same as always. I hugged people. Made small talk. Took my time settling in. My brother was already there, laughing loudly in the living room, telling a story about work. Same posture. Same voice. Same certainty that everyone wanted to hear what he had to say. I didn't interrupt. I didn't compete. I moved into the kitchen to help my aunt, just like I always did. That's when something unexpected happened. My cousin, someone I hadn't seen in a while, smiled at me and said, "Hey, how's that thing you've been working on going?" It was an innocent question. Casual. But the timing was perfect. I felt the room subtly shift. My brother's voice trailed off mid-sentence. He didn't turn fully, but he listened. I smiled and answered honestly. I said it was going well. That it had grown more than I expected. That I was grateful, but busy. Busy. That word alone changed how people looked at me. My aunt asked what I was working on. For a split second, my old instinct kicked in. Downplay it. Keep it vague. Change the subject. But I didn't. I took a breath and told the truth. I said I'd started a consulting business a few years earlier. I explained that it began as something small, something I worked on late at night and on weekends. I said I kept my regular job for a long time because I wanted stability, not applause. And then I said, calmly, that I no longer needed that job. No drama. No numbers. Just facts. My brother laughed lightly from the living room and said, "Oh, like a little side thing?" I looked at him, still calm, and said, "It was." Now it's my full-time work. That was the first crack. People asked questions. Real ones. What kind of consulting? How long I'd been doing it? What kind of clients I worked with? I answered slowly, carefully, not oversharing, not hiding. And then my cousin said something that I hadn't planned, that I hadn't asked for, and that changed everything. She said, "Juliette helped my company last year. We were losing money, and she came in and fixed things. Honestly, we wouldn't have survived without her." The room went quiet in a way that felt heavy, not awkward. Heavy with recalibration. My brother turned fully toward us now. He smiled, but it was different. Tighter. Less certain. "Oh yeah," he said. "That's impressive." It sounded polite. But I heard the disbelief underneath. My aunt tilted her head and said, "Isn't that why you bought that house near the lake?" The house. I hadn't told him about it. I hadn't told most people. I didn't confirm details. I simply nodded and said it had been a good long-term investment. Investment. That word landed harder than any bragging ever could. I watched my brother process it in real time. His posture changed. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. He was replaying the anniversary party in his head. Replaying the toast. Replaying the laughter. And realizing something didn't add up. For the first time, he wasn't ahead of the story. Dinner continued, but the energy had shifted permanently. My brother didn't interrupt anymore. He listened. He asked fewer questions about himself and more about others. Not because he'd suddenly become humble, but because he was unsettled. Later that evening, when plates were cleared and people were relaxing, he sat closer to me than usual. Too close. "So," he said casually, "how long have you been doing this, really?" I told him the truth. "Years." He nodded slowly. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I smiled. "You never asked." That answer bothered him more than any accusation could have. On the drive home that night, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge yet. This was awareness. And awareness is uncomfortable. It forces people to confront the stories they tell themselves. My brother had spent years defining himself by comparison. And now, that comparison was no longer working in his favor. But what I didn't know then was that this discomfort would grow. That it would follow him into his own life. Into his work. Into a moment where he would need something he never imagined asking from me. And when that moment came, the regret would hit him instantly, in a way no argument ever could. After that dinner at my aunt's house, I could feel the shift everywhere. It wasn't dramatic. No confrontations. No whispered arguments behind closed doors. It was subtler than that, which somehow made it more powerful. People started looking at me differently. Not with pity. Not with polite disinterest. With curiosity. With respect. My brother felt it too. I could tell. He didn't call me out anymore. He didn't make jokes at my expense. Instead, he watched me the way people watch something they don't fully understand yet. Like he was trying to catch me slipping, trying to confirm that what he'd seen was a fluke. That I'd somehow fooled everyone. But the truth has a way of holding its shape. Weeks passed. Life went on. And then the cracks in his own world began to show. I heard it first through our parents. Casual comments. The kind they didn't think meant much. That his job was stressful lately. That the company was going through changes. That he seemed tired. Irritable. Less certain. Normally, I would have brushed it off. Not my business. Not my problem. But after years of being underestimated, you develop a certain awareness. You notice when the ground under someone else starts to wobble. Then one evening, my phone rang. His name on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. We didn't talk one-on-one much. Not like this. Not without an audience. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded different. Lower. Careful. We exchanged a few awkward pleasantries. Weather. Traffic. Nothing of substance. And then he finally said what he'd called to say. "Work's been rough," he admitted. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to fill the silence. He talked about deadlines. Pressure. Leadership changes. He talked around the problem without naming it directly, like he was testing the ground. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. "You seem like you've got things figured out. Not successful. Not lucky. Figured out." I thanked him, quietly. He paused again. And then, finally, he crossed the line he'd never imagined crossing. "I was wondering if you could maybe take a look at something for me. Just unofficially. I mean, since you do this kind of thing." There it was. The ask. The room didn't tilt this time. I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt steady. Grounded. Fully present in my body. Every version of me from the past would have jumped at this moment. Would have rushed to help. Would have seen it as validation. Proof that I was finally being taken seriously. But this version of me knew better. I asked him what he wanted me to look at. He hesitated, then said he'd explain in person. He suggested we meet at our parents' place the following weekend, since we'd both be there anyway. I agreed. When that weekend came, the house felt heavy with familiarity. Same walls. Same furniture. Same dynamics lingering in the air. My brother arrived late. He looked tired. Not the confident, polished version he usually presented. The cracks were real now. After dinner, he asked if we could talk privately. We went into the living room while our parents cleaned up in the kitchen. He laid it out then. The company he worked for was losing clients. Internal decisions he'd pushed for weren't working. His reputation, the one he'd built on confidence and certainty, was starting to fray. "I think I made some mistakes," he said. That sentence alone told me how serious things were. He never admitted mistakes. Not like that. He explained his situation in detail. Numbers. Decisions. Missed opportunities. And as he spoke, I saw it clearly. Not just the business issues, but the pattern behind them. The same one I'd lived under my entire life. The need to be right. To dominate. To dismiss quieter voices. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "So, what do you think?" This was the moment. The one I'd imagined late at night after that anniversary party. The one where I could finally flip the script. Where I could say something sharp. Where I could remind him of the toast. Of the laughter. Of the way he'd reduced me to a joke. I didn't. Instead, I took a breath and said something far more powerful. "I think I could help," I said slowly. "But I won't." His face fell, just slightly. "Why?" he asked. I met his eyes. Calm. Steady. Unapologetic. "Because I don't mix family and business," I said. "And because I spent too many years being talked down to by someone who didn't see my value. I won't put myself back in that position." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked stunned. Not angry. Not offended. Shocked. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I continued. "I'm saying it because I respect myself now." The silence stretched between us. He finally nodded. Slowly. Like he was absorbing something unfamiliar. "I didn't realize," he said. "I know," I replied. That was all. No argument. No raised voices. No dramatic exit. But something irreversible happened in that room. For the first time in his life, my brother had to sit with the reality that he'd misjudged me completely. That the person he'd mocked publicly was not only capable, but strong enough to say no without bitterness. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I walked away from that conversation lighter than I'd felt in years. But his regret didn't stop there. Because saying no wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a deeper reckoning. One that would play out in front of people whose opinions mattered to him far more than mine ever had. After that conversation in my parents' living room, I didn't hear from my brother for a while. No calls. No texts. No passive-aggressive jokes disguised as humor. Just silence. And unlike before, this silence didn't feel heavy or unresolved. It felt earned. What I didn't realize at the time was that my refusal had done something much deeper than bruise his ego. It forced him to sit alone with a version of himself he'd never had to face before. The version that wasn't always right. The version that had dismissed someone who quietly understood more than he ever bothered to ask. Families notice changes, even when no one talks about them. At the next few gatherings, my brother was different. He still showed up. Still laughed when appropriate. But the volume was turned down. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he chose his words carefully, like someone who had learned the hard way that confidence without awareness can be dangerous. People noticed. Especially the ones who had always hovered around him, drawn to his certainty. Without the constant performance, the spotlight softened. And slowly, naturally, it drifted. Toward me. Not because I demanded it. Not because I announced anything. But because people began asking questions. Real ones. They asked about my work. My plans. My perspective. They asked because they were curious, not polite. And every time I answered calmly, thoughtfully, without ego, it reinforced something my brother couldn't undo. The story had changed. The moment it fully landed for him came at a large event hosted by a family friend. It wasn't just a party. It was one of those gatherings where personal and professional worlds overlap. Business owners. Community leaders. People my brother respected deeply. People whose opinions mattered to him in a way family approval never quite did. He invited me to come along. That alone told me everything. At the event, I stayed exactly who I'd become. Present. Observant. Unrushed. I spoke when spoken to. I listened carefully. I didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't need to. My brother hovered nearby, watching how people responded to me. Watching conversations extend instead of trail off. Watching people lean in, nod, ask follow-up questions. Then someone asked the inevitable question. So what do you do? Before I could answer, my brother stepped in. This is my sister, he said. And then, without hesitation, without sarcasm, without framing it as a surprise, he said, she runs a consulting business. She's really good at what she does. There was no joke attached. No softening laugh. No comparison. Just truth. I looked at him for a brief second, surprised, then turned back to the person asking and filled in the details myself. The conversation flowed naturally. Professionally. Respectfully. And I saw it then. In my brother's face. The regret. Not sharp. Not dramatic. Quiet. Heavy. Real. He wasn't regretting the toast itself anymore. He was regretting the years behind it. The assumptions. The shortcuts. The way he'd built his confidence by standing on someone else's silence. We left the event together. Walked toward the parking lot in the cool evening air. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You did great tonight." I thanked him. Not because I needed his approval, but because it was the first time he'd spoken to me without positioning himself above me. That walk said more than any apology ever could. Our relationship didn't transform overnight. There was no dramatic reconciliation. But something fundamental had shifted. The hierarchy he'd believed in was gone. In its place was something more honest. More balanced. And as for me, I learned a lesson I wish I could pass back to my younger self. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who's committed to misunderstanding you. You just need to stop performing for their comfort. By the time everything settled, I finally understood something that had taken me most of my life to learn. The night my brother mocked me wasn't the moment he took something from me. It was the moment I stopped giving something away. For years, I'd given him my silence. My restraint. My willingness to be the smaller one so the room could stay comfortable. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself it was love. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I was afraid of being seen. Afraid that if I took up space, I'd be pushed back into it even harder. That changed the moment he laughed at me in front of everyone. Not because it broke me, but because it exposed the cost of staying quiet. It showed me exactly what my silence had bought me. A role. A label. A version of myself that existed only because I kept agreeing to it. After the event where my brother finally introduced me with respect, I drove home alone, windows down, night air rushing in, and I felt something I hadn't expected at all. Relief. Not triumph. Not pride. Relief. Because I no longer felt like I was carrying a secret version of myself around, waiting for the right moment to defend it. I didn't need to defend anything anymore. The truth was already standing on its own. My brother and I never sat down for a dramatic heart-to-heart. There was no big apology speech. No tears. No promises to do better. But something far more meaningful happened over time. Consistency. He stopped making jokes at my expense. He stopped talking over me. He stopped assuming he knew more just because he spoke louder. And when old habits crept in, he caught himself. That mattered more than words ever could. As for me, I changed too. I stopped editing myself before speaking. I stopped shrinking my accomplishments to make others comfortable. I stopped explaining my choices like they needed approval. Not in an aggressive way. Just quietly. Firmly. I also learned that revenge doesn't always look the way people expect it to. It isn't always sharp or loud or public. Sometimes it looks like self-respect so solid that it forces the other person to confront themselves. My brother didn't regret mocking me because it embarrassed me. He regretted it because it revealed his blind spot. He had built a version of himself that depended on comparison. And when that comparison failed, when the person he dismissed no longer fit the story, the foundation cracked. And here's the part that surprised me most. I didn't feel the urge to keep winning. Once the balance shifted, I didn't need to push it further. I didn't need to outshine him. I didn't need to remind him of the toast or the laughter or the room full of people who didn't step in. I had already reclaimed the thing that mattered most. My dignity. For anyone listening to this who's older, who's lived long enough to know that family wounds don't always heal cleanly, I want you to hear this. If someone in your life mocks you, minimizes you, or treats you like the lesser one, it's not because they see you clearly. It's because they don't want to. And you don't need to correct them with words. You correct them by refusing to live down to the version of you that benefits them. Silence isn't weakness when it's chosen. But staying silent out of fear will always cost you something. I learned that the hard way. My brother's regret wasn't instant because of a comeback or a confrontation. It was instant the moment he realized he'd misjudged the one person who never needed to announce who she was. That realization stays with a person. Long after the laughter fades. Long after the room empties. And long after the roles they relied on stop working. That's the kind of revenge that lasts. If you like this story, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today?